Beyond the Wrench with Jay Goninen from Find a Wrench.
All right, welcome back to everybody. I am excited to have this week's guest on, a good friend of mine, somebody that I work really closely with in the industry, Brian Hebert from Toyota. How are you doing today?
Hey, Jay, I am doing great. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. This year went extremely fast. It's really, really weird that we're already into 2022 planning and trying to close out a hopefully strong 2021 for everybody.
Yeah, it's been a great, after everything that we've come through, it's been a great year, and really looking forward to 2022 and what we can do to continue to keep showing the need and our desire to elevate the technician at both dealerships and, independent in the industry in general.
Yeah, I think that's what I love about you guys. It's not always Toyota focused. It's very industry focused. You guys do a phenomenal job as a company, a great partner of ours, and somebody we always look forward to just having conversations with. It's always a blast. And I got to come out and see all of you in the Portland region. I think in the summer, this past summer, we went to the Columbia Gorge, I believe it was, right?
Yeah, Skamania is where it was actually
Skamania
at.
Lodge. Yes. Beautiful, beautiful part of the country that I hadn't been to. So, but really got to see your culture firsthand, got to see the people firsthand, and was just blown away. Just so accommodating, and couldn't be in a more beautiful spot in the U.S. So I just had a blast. But let's talk about that. So when you're in your day-to-day dealings with Toyota, what is it that you do? What is your job title? What's the area that you cover, and what exactly do you do?
Yeah, so my official title is Technical Services and Training Manager. So we love acronyms in Toyota. We call it the TSTM. But my job really is kind of twofold. One is to work with our field technical specialists, who are technicians by trade. Most of my team has come up from retail ranks, and they work with our dealerships to improve quality and support technicians in repairing of our vehicles. So we have lots of issues that are difficult to repair. And so these guys, I call them ninjas. They're the ninjas. They're in and out as quickly as they can, but they come in and try to support where they can technicians in fixing our cars. I also manage three great guys that are they're called service technical specialists, and they are the guys that teach the technicians. And so I got three great guys who've got a collective experience of about 150 years in the industry. And they do a phenomenal job teaching our guys how to work on cars and, the training that's important to continue being able to work on that. My background, I went to a GM ASEP is actually what I went through. Did an internship with Toyota out of college at Colorado State University in Pueblo. Was a technician prior to that. I've been in the industry. I started working at a Firestone when I was 15. So I can't believe I'm going to say this, but I've been in the industry over 30 years. It's amazing.
We're getting old.
Yeah, we are getting old. But yeah, and then I worked on our technical assistance hotline. I was a product quality engineer for us for a while. A field product engineer at FTS, and a multitude of other different spots. But, the soft spot in my heart has always been technicians, because I feel like I can relate and compare to the struggles that they've dealt with, because I've seen it ever since day one that I stepped in. So I've got lots of opinions, but ultimately at the end of the day, we're really just trying to elevate the technician at our dealerships and make sure that they are seen as a key component to their business, to the dealership's business.
Yeah, and I think the beauty in having you on this podcast is that you get to see a lot of different dealerships, and even though they're under the same umbrella, there are a lot of variances between dealerships and the way that they're run, and maybe different ways that they interact with technicians. And that's really what the point of our podcast today is, right? Is really helping technicians understand why they're doing what they're doing. And I think oftentimes, maybe when you and I were growing up, technicians weren't maybe a glorious spot to be in, right? And it wasn't a well celebrated profession. But I'm curious as to, when you're going around and you're seeing these dealerships, have you seen some level of evolution with that piece there, where the technician is maybe more respected than they had been in decades past?
Yeah, as you were saying that, I was thinking, unfortunately, it really hasn't changed all that much.
Yeah.
But there has been a growth at the dealer level and industry level to really recognize that the technicians are the key integral part of the business. You're right. There is not one dealer I cover 73 of our region dealers in the Pacific Northwest, but there's not one dealer that operates the same as the other dealer. But when you boil it down to the technician level, that's about the only place where a lot of dealerships match. And whether that's flat rate or salary-based pay, the unfortunate part is a lot of that is exactly the same. We have done a really good job, I would say, over the last maybe 10 years of really trying to kind of get the technician iron, what I call, in the fire. And the fire is burning right now. There is a lot of discussion around how we can do that. Obviously, it's because of our units in operation is going up. But we need technicians. And you can find technicians, but it's hard to find the ones that are really, really key to what they're doing that are not already employed.
Right.
And so, I keep telling a lot of our stores, and I think a lot of people in the industry need to recognize that we've got people in the hopper. We can train a lot of people that we have. The unfortunate part is the bucket that we need to be able to pull from people from is not full. And that's where it really, a lot of our focus has recently been on trying to get more into high schools, community colleges, and support that level. And, once we retain them, once we get them, we have to retain the technicians. And I think that's, what really you and I are going to talk about today.
Yeah. And this is something in the evolution of technicians, of shops in general, that I feel like has almost been forced, right? Because there is a shortage, and there's some level of, I think, from the dealership side, it's become really evident that this is a really profitable part of our business, right? Mm-hmm. And that it's what 20, 30 years ago might have been a cost of doing business, or, we have to do this service work too. We like selling the cars. We don't like doing the service work as much. But I do feel like there's been a general paradigm shift amongst ownership groups in that they see that now. They see the value in service. And when you're running a business, obviously that financial side is a big, big piece of why you're doing it in the first place, why you took the risk to start a business in the first place. And when you see how much of the pie that contributes, it starts to open your eyes a little bit, and it starts to show you, one, how valuable they are, a technician I'm referring to, but then also really what their talent level is, how talented these folks are that are working on cars in the shop. So I'm curious to pick your brain on that part. Is that an accurate assessment of what I'm seeing, as far as, are you seeing the same thing where profits may have driven that, but then it kind of opened the eyes, and the general public is starting to see that these are some really talented people?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And we are seeing that across the board. And one of the biggest components to making sure that that happens, and why I mentioned retain, was because if we don't retain the technician and they understand what they're doing, then they leave, and that profitability goes away really quickly. We have a number, I won't throw the number out, of what we believe a technician is worth at a dealership. But when you look at what that is and the cost to re-onboard that, technicians oftentimes don't quite understand what their contribution to the business is, and how, if they ask for more money, if they need more tools, how that impacts the business. But secondarily, when those things are being asked to management, sometimes management doesn't think about how those things impact their business as well. And so, I think why we focused on the power of why in this question was because, the dealers need to really start to think about, with that paradigm shift, bringing the technician into the discussion of the business. We don't see often enough where dealership service management is expressing to the technicians what their plan is and how that the technician actually folds into the plan, other than just hours sold. And that's really what technicians always look at, is how many hours I'm selling, because they're trying to fill their paycheck. Yeah. But they don't understand what the management level is having to do with the number of hours being sold just to keep the lights on, and to be able to afford those new tools and that support, recognize technicians, and making sure they're retaining them. So, they're key contributors to the business. And if you don't tell the key contributors or the stakeholders in the business on what's going on, and they decide to leave, it hurts everybody in the long run. And I think that's really the focus of what you and I really want to talk about, is making sure that somehow we roll those technicians into that understanding, so that paradigm shift that you mentioned really starts to happen. And they don't want to go. They're folded into the culture and they don't want to leave. And that will slow down a lot of the problems that we're dealing with.
Yeah, and I think it very much to our mission is really to try and get those technicians into good places, because we feel like if they go to a good place, they're going to stay at a good place, right? And and a big piece of that, what I'll pick out of what you just said, has been missing for a long time, and that is the transparency. That is the sharing of information so that they understand what the big picture looks like. I think there are a lot of management teams that'll sit down this time of year, go through the year, show them what the financials look like. But a lot of times everything's grouped into, this is what we sold, and it always leads with what we sold for new cars or trucks or equipment, whatever it is. But then you trickle down the finances and you see, oh, there's the service department. They actually did a pretty good job of contributing to the profit of this whole thing. So it's always kind of secondary. And I think not having those continual conversations, whether it's through a one-on-one or weekly or monthly meetings with your team to help them understand, I think that's what maybe creates a barrier that we're seeing in a lot of places right now, where if you're not sharing that information on a consistent basis, you can't have conversations around those things. You can't maybe have that wage increase. If somebody's coming in and asking for a raise and it's because they got an offer somewhere else, they don't understand a lot of times the business side of it from the whole. You mentioned it. They understand what their impact is on their specific bay and what they're doing because it affects their paycheck. But talk to me a little bit about that part of the communication side and how important that is to help a technician understand what they mean in the big picture of things.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things I like to do when I go to a store is I try to look at it from both sets of shoes, right? Technicians got big shoes to fill. Service managers got big shoes to fill. So when I go in and I'm looking at something, I look back and I say, okay, from a technician standpoint, what is the technician seeing? A lot of our stores right now, the place is overran. There's so much work to be had. that things are just flowing through. And ROs are floating, right? They're flying. You got ASMs out. They're generally not happy because, they're dealing with customers that may not be happy. But the technician, all he sees is the next RO, the next RO, the next RO, the next RO. Oftentimes he doesn't get folded into the business on why that next RO is coming. And, pick a month. We have incentive months for everything. Service has incentive months for those. So when you're in we'll just use a tire month, or, whatever it happens to be, a tire month, and the ASM keeps coming out and handing you those repair orders, the technician oftentimes doesn't know that maybe there's an objective that the service manager is trying to hit. And so he's trying to push it down. He's just pushing and pushing and pushing. But the technician doesn't understand that. So then you stop there, and then you go put yourself in the service manager's shoes, right? And the service manager's in his office going, oh, man, I got to hit an objective. I got to hit we'll just use a number, 1,000 tire sales this month. And I'm behind by 300. So what does he do? He cranks up the BDC. He cranks up the ASMs. Things start flowing, right? Things are looking really good in there. He's all happy. ROs are rolling out. The technician's ticked off because there's nothing but ROs coming in, and nobody knows what's going on. And so what I really like to try to do, to your point, is to kind of fold them into the business understanding of what's happening. So one of the things that we promote is we call them weekly huddle ups. Some guys get them done weekly. Some guys get them done bi-monthly. Sometimes people do them once a year.
Whether they need it or not, right? No.
Right, exactly. But when you have these huddle ups and you can express to your service technicians what the business model is, they might understand why they're being asked to stay another 2 or 3 hours. And it doesn't look like I'm taking advantage of the technician. It looks like I'm taking advantage of the opportunities that we have to bring in the work, to service the customer, to do it the right way, to meet their needs. And oftentimes, because you understand what that looks like, you're more willing to be able to support because you know the business is moving. And at the end of the day, if we sell the 1,000 tires and the service manager hits his number, the ASM hits their number, the technician hits their number, we might have worked a little bit harder for it, but at least we all knew what goal we were focused on. And I think that's a lot of times the problem that we deal with, particularly at the back end of the shop. You start looking at other things like parts and, shop loading and all these things. The technician, the only thing he sees is, damn it, there's another car on my rack. And I really wanted to go home, or, unfortunately the thing blew up and parts didn't have what they had. Well, everybody needs to work in concert, and it's important to get them to understand that they're key contributors to the business. And the only way I can understand how to do that is to get people involved and get them to recognize that they are, for a service department, you ain't making any money if you don't have technicians.
No.
And so they are the key contributor. They're the inventory of the service department, like the cars are the inventory of the sales department. And if we don't keep the technicians happy, and look, it's not always going to be great. It's not all roses, but at least if they know why we're doing what we're doing, that helps them to understand what the business model is. And when things get slow, things get tight, and there's a reason for that. And when things are bustling, there are. But they need to understand that there's a lot of stuff that goes into what a service manager does: rent factor, comp, pay, uniforms, all those things that go along with the things to retain people, which are just as good, but they just don't get that business acumen to why that's being done.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes down, again, to communication. And if they don't know that why up front, and I would, for those that are listening, highly encourage those in management positions to have these conversations about the why up front. Because if you're finding yourself in that spot, in a lot of cases like Wisconsin, where it is tire season right now, and you're busting your tails trying to get tires on, and maybe the techs are worn out from doing tires and they hate it. I actually have a really good example of that right now with the shop that I'm working with and talking with. But the more you can help them understand why, and not only the why you're doing that job at that specific time, but why it's important for all of you to be rowing in the same direction to start with. And a lot of times I think that cuts down on some of the talk in the shop too, because like if you're just forcing ROs out and you're the service manager and you're just force feeding more work, it's hard to pick your head up as a technician and understand why that's happening. And I think having that initial conversation to say, hey, listen, the better we do here, the more advantageous this is for everybody, because we're going to get work through here. If you want to make more money, we can do that. If you want some flexibility, let's make sure that we plan it out, because we got a big month ahead and we know that we're going to need all hands on deck to do this stuff. It's more of that type of communication up front that helps you set the stage for those one-on-one meetings, or having those side conversations with the technician. And that's where I see a lot of shops fall short, right? Is that they don't have those conversations, those proactive conversations, or if they do, it's only focused on numbers, right? They'll get that conversation going and they'll say, these are our numbers. We got to do better. Well, why do we have to do better? Like, I know I want to do better because I want to get paid more, but why? What does it matter if I make the shop better, right? Like, how important is it from that aspect of getting them to see the bigger picture and beyond their bay?
Yeah, well, and that's a really good point. And sharing that information is very key. And sharing pertinent information. And a lot of times we hold it really close to our vest, and we don't want to, as managers, we don't want to tell people what we're trying to do. And it's that trust and that transparency that really comes out. But then you got to make it a normal thing too. You can't, one of the biggest problems when you get asked to come to the service manager's office, what usually is the reason?
It's always bad. It's
exactly
always
right.
bad.
Oh man, he's losing his job, or oh boy, they saw he was I don't know, washing his car or whatever it happens to be, right? But whenever somebody gets brought to the office, it's like it's got to be a negative thing. And just think in your own shops, if what would be the advantage of having people that actually felt like they might be able to come and talk to you? I mean, you're in no danger of having people leave you if your door's open and they feel like they can come in and it's not always negative. I think I told you the story about one of my own field travelers that I was traveling with, and we spent a whole week together. And for the first day and a half, the person I was with was just like not there. They were totally in a different spot. And finally, I just said, "Hey, man, what gives?" Because we got on a plane, we flew together. It's just hasn't been the same. And the unfortunate part is all the management that he had ever had, anytime that they wanted to travel with him, they felt like it was going to be a negative experience. They were being reprimanded, or they were going to be told how to do their job, or they were doing something wrong. And look, I was just there to be with them. I just wanted to know how I might be able to support, how we could help. And so when you leave the office or you bring somebody there to do your one-on-ones, don't always make it negative. And that's really what we always find, is that generally speaking, anytime we have a meeting in the office and the door is closed, that means something is going down. And so I think, if, just to your point, if we can share that information, we can build that trust and that transparency, and we can build advocates in our business, then they want to stay. And you're better off for it in the end.
Well, I think you hit on a really key point there, and that's that none of us are perfect at this, right? There's a lot of stuff that I could improve on in my own business in that regard. And I do think that we need to make it normal for somebody to come into our offices and just talk, right? And it's so hard with technicians, and this is the difference I think with technicians, is that if they're sitting in your office, they're not producing hours. And so then if that service manager is sitting there and they're thinking in their head, oh my goodness, like everybody's walking by my office right now, there goes the owner, there goes the fixed ops director, like, they're all looking at me talking to this person that's not currently billing out hours, and it almost generates this level of anxiety with a service manager. And then I feel like that almost breeds some of that, like, okay, thanks for talking, get back out to the shop, get back out to the shop. How do we get around that part where, we are trying to push financial performance, which then in some cases makes it really, really hard to sit down and have those conversations? Because if you sit down for an hour, you just cost that technician money, you just cost the business money. Where's the middle? Like what's the best way to approach that?
Yeah, well, I've seen a couple successful scenarios. We've got a really big dealership in the Seattle metro area that has team leader dinners. And so what happens is they take their team out after hours. They go and they have a dinner and they have a meeting every quarter. And the way that flows up is the technicians on those teams bring it to the team leader. Team leader escalates it at these meeting and these dinners. And then if they need to air something out, then they will come back, or they will do some kind of off-site kind of meeting that takes away the chaos of the dealership. And so that's one good way that I've seen some of the larger dealers do that. When you're in a smaller scenario where maybe you only have 3 or 4 technicians, I'd love to say that every dealership is booked wall to wall, and they're running 160% efficiency all the time, but that's not it.
No.
When they're dangling when their feet dangling at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and there's nothing going on, that's probably a good time to do that. And so again, every dealership's different. Every service center is different. You just have to look at what those opportunities are, but try not to let the things get in the way from doing that.
Right.
And to your point is that guy, don't do it right at 11 o'clock. You got to do it when everybody's got some time, and then devote the time to it. But those team dinners seem to be a really good key. Again, this dealership's got 5 teams. You have 5 technicians under each one of those team leaders. And so it's a little bit different. And then sometimes they do team leaders where they include families and spouses too. So it's not taking away from their own house, their own personal life, is they might include the spouse. And then that way there's, again, camaraderie within the entire group, and they don't feel like they're doing it as part of their job. They're doing it as part of the business. They want to be a partner.
And that speaks volumes, right? Because how many of us say that we're family-oriented businesses, or that we value family, yet there's no involvement from their family in the business? And doing something like that, I think, brings so much value to that technician, and it does make them feel like more than a number, right? And I think you've got to look for those opportunities, to make them feel like more than a number. And when most of the time when our interaction is either technical in nature, we're trying to fix a car, we're trying to get it through the shop, or it's numbers driven based on, hey, here's what you produced last month, here's your rework, here's, all of this stuff that we're talking about. Very rarely is it family focused. And I will say there are some amazing service managers out there that do a phenomenal job with talking with their people, knowing their people, knowing their spouse's name, knowing their kids' names, being able to do those little things. Because I think that's a lot of what is missing, is we get so involved in the day-to-day of a business that maybe we let some of that stuff slide. And when we're trying to paint that why for them, there's some powerful stuff there, right?
Sure.
Like, why you're doing this, you're trying to support your family. We want you to support your family. We want you to have the best life you possibly can. And we care about you as an individual. And I think that right there and maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like that's what a lot of shops miss.
Yeah, and the other thing is too, and maybe we've missed a big key component of this whole deal, is the owner operator and the dealer principal need to be involved in these as well.
Yes.
It can't just be the service manager, because I mean, we're all kidding ourselves if we think that the service manager, the buck stops with them all the time.
Right.
Oftentimes they want to do things, or there's things that roll up to them. Owner operators or dealer principals, they're maybe on a different direction. And I think it goes a long ways when owner operators understand what's coming from their own people. And so, you don't always have to have that, but at least try to make sure that they're in the loop, because ultimately it's got to be from the top down. They have to be bought into whatever you're trying to change, whatever culture you're trying to build. And if they're not part of the conversation, then you're just kind of, you're throwing it to the wind and hoping that it lands somewhere. So that was a great point you made there. And I thought, man, we say service managers, but we really mean, the service manager also needs to be involved, and they all have to be on. Executive management all needs to be on the same page.
I do have a great Toyota specific story, and I wish I could recall which Toyota dealership it was, but it was in your territory in the Portland region, where we were having a meeting on, a technician recruiting plan and really trying to fill their pipeline. And actually, this might have been when I was in Portland that I heard this story, was that their ownership, their owner, was consistent every day in walking through the shop and saying hello to the technicians and greeting them. And it wasn't just a flyby, like, hi, just so you know, I'm here and I'm watching you. It was more of a true relational aspect. And when you get to know the owner and you feel like it's not intimidating to say hello to them. I know when I was a young tech, and even just young in my professional career, when the owner walked in the room, you kind of froze up a little bit. Like it wasn't comfortable. But I have a feeling that individual is doing a phenomenal job in walking around and making people feel comfortable around them, and not making it seem like this is this big figure that nobody can talk to, but somebody that you could actually have a personal relationship with.
Yeah, and people need to not be afraid to bring things to the owner as well, within reason. And I always try to preference that, right? Because there is a reason that there's a manager there. The manager's job is to really manage the day-to-day things, but you don't want somebody to, feel like that. And I really work hard to make sure that my manager is involved in what I'm doing, but my team also involves the manager with that as well as our executive management, because you never know when they're going to be put in a situation where they can impact change, and they need to understand what's really happening at that level. And so the more that they do, they need to not feel like they can't approach an owner and operator. And we've seen them all. I mean, you see people, I mean, even I do it, you get a little, I don't know, giddy or whatever when the manager or the executive management walks in the room, because there's a reason they're in that spot.
Yeah.
But also you need to, just to your point, not be afraid to at least have just a cordial person to conversation, because ultimately that's what they want. They're always getting fed the line that looks like roses and cherries and everything else. So
yeah, I want to pick something you said there and maybe ask you from a technician's shoes or a technician standpoint. Do you have any advice on that interaction for a technician? So say they see a dealer principal walk past them, and I've seen it both ways, where some will divulge way too much information and not just shop specific, but very personal stuff.
Right.
And then others that'll just kind of grunt at a manager or a dealer principal as they're walking by. And sometimes it is just an awkward interaction. So any advice maybe to a technician on how to approach that situation?
Yeah. So I have two things that I tell my staff of ways to go. And one is you got to always kind of have an elevator speech ready. So your elevator speech is just kind of specifically highlighting things that you're focused on, things that you're working on. So every technician will have a different level of that, right? You might be a maintenance technician, and you need to know what your aspect of job is. And again, this goes back to the service manager kind of explaining and selling what the, what the aspirations and the contributions that they're making. But then also, if you're going to bring an issue to anybody, I don't care whether it's your team leader, if it's your service manager, if it's a dealer principal, have at least thought out in your brain what a possible solution might be. Because you might just find that they're going to ask you, oh, well, that's a really good point, but one, who have you told? And two, what are you doing about it? And if, a lot of times the reason we get nervous is because we're going to bring up something that's probably controversial anyhow. And if you haven't done your due diligence and followed the hierarchy of what should be done, that's when you get nervous about it. And there are those guys, right, that they just want to spout off and they want to go and tell and, be heard and be recognized about what they said. And sometimes that's okay. It depends on where the whole situation sits. But that's what I would say. Have your elevator speech ready. And if you're going to bring up a problem, try to have some kind of solution to it that contributes to the business, right? Yeah. That is the why of what we're going to do, because hopefully we've had this conversation and exactly everything we've talked about has been aired out. We understand what we're trying to do. We understand where we're going, and we're understanding how you might be able to help us. And that'll go, it'll carry legs forever with a dealer principal or an operator, because they'll feel like they got true, honest opinion, but you're also trying to better them. And it's a true partnership.
I 100% agree with that. One thing I would add, and this comes from my time sitting in the manager's seat, is don't become known as the complainer, right? Because I've been in those discussions with owners, been in those executive meetings, and that puts a target on your back, right? So for you technicians out there that are listening, don't just bitch about everything. Like, actually have good things that hit home. Because even with the complainers that I had, or that I felt were complainers, there were a lot of times where they had really good insight and really good things, but you were almost deafened because they had complained about everything else leading up to that. And so if you're thinking through how, or something that you want to present to an ownership level person or an executive level person, don't do it all the time. Don't just always be complaining about stuff, because that puts you in a box you don't want to be in. Make sure you bring some positive energy to it. And as Brian alluded to, have a solution or recommendations and something that maybe they don't see because they're not out there, all the time, that can help the business get better. Because if you do that, I think you get looked at in a different light, and that's really, really helpful.
Yeah, and be strategic about it. I mean, be strategic about how you're going to bring it up. If it's not the right place to do it, then don't do it. Save it for a better time. I've learned the hard way with that. Everybody who's ever been in a situation where you're trying to bring up those things, you just got to be strategic about how you do it and make sure you're doing it at the right time. Yeah,
I agree. So going back to the why, and I think this all is very, very connected, right? When we talk about that communication side, I think we talk about communication so much because that's how you get the why across to somebody. But I also feel like people feel it, right? They feel it if it's real, and they feel it if it's not real. If they're trying to paint the why, but they're not doing maybe the best job at painting the why. And maybe you've got that service manager that wasn't trained on some of the leadership things, or that doesn't fit their personality style. Is that something that can be learned? Or, I think a lot of times maybe that service manager ends up as the middle person between the fixed ops director or executive manager or whoever. And so they're trying to convey a message. I know I've been stuck in that position before, where I'm trying to maybe convey a message to my team that I don't necessarily agree with. And so maybe the why isn't on the same page. how do you communicate that, or how do you get that feeling that everybody is on the same page? And let's face it, we're all people, so not everybody's going to see eye to eye on everything. Uh, are there times where maybe that's not interconnected, and maybe that's why the why isn't getting out to the shop?
Yeah, the answer is yes. I mean, there are people who are natural born leaders, and but I do think that you have to work at being a leader, and there are things that you have to do to learn how to better lead, and you need to understand how people want to be led. Yeah, I think you can train people how to be leaders, and you can help them to improve on how their leadership capabilities are. Sometimes it doesn't always work. Sometimes the person's not involved, or doesn't want to be involved, or they're not that person. And I think that's the opportunity for executive management to see that when that happens. It doesn't necessarily mean they're bad at what they do. They're just not in the leadership role. But I think if you find that you're not connecting with your staff or the people that you're leading, it's important to make sure that you ask them what their interpretation or impression is of what you just told them, and make sure that everybody is understanding that philosophy. So if you're trying to go for 1,000 tires, if you need to write it on a big board, if you need to put it on a banner, it says 1,000 tires, maybe that's what you need to do. Maybe it's as simple as telling, your 3-man crew, hey, we're trying to hit 1,000 tires. But you got to find out that, okay, if I'm going to hit 1,000 tires this month, I should at least probably once a week say where we're at, and maybe just tell them. And I think anybody can do that. If you expect something, and you inspect what you're inspecting, and they see that that's happening, then you're going to naturally lead. And all these other things, some of these other things, like I'm not exactly the best at the follow-up component to probably my leadership. But I do try to at least make them aware that I'm not that great at it. And so hold me accountable too. If you're sitting back in the car, and we got a lot of guys that spend a lot of windshield time, and you're thinking, man, I wish he would do that, then by all means call me, and let's at least make it happen. But I try to understand that that's my shortcoming, and if people are telling me that, then I listen to that. I appreciate that honest feedback of what that shortcoming is. And so I would just say, to your point, though, is that leaders can learn to be leaders. I do truly believe that. There's lots of leadership classes that I've been a part of. Some were really great. Some were not so great. Some strategies that I've employed work on some people, and they don't work on other people. And I say that with all sincerity, because it's not like we're trying to label people and put that program or that strategy on top of them. It's just it's what works best for the individuals. And every guy that I work with, every FTS, every STS I work with has a different strategy.
Yeah.
And the last thing I would say about that is that if you do get promoted from technician to manager, or from manager to supervisor, or whatever it is, one thing that I've always tried to focus on is try to be that same person. Try to be the person that you got promoted from, and try not to go and then be somebody different because now I'm a manager. You can't always be the friend, right? You're going to have to manage them, but people learn and they understand where you're coming from. And then if all of a sudden you're a manager and you totally change direction, people don't know what's going on, and then they regress and they don't do the same thing. So, if you get a glass office and you're sitting on one side, be the same person on the glass office as you are on the other side.
I think that is such an advantage if you look at it through the lens of kind of the positive side of this, and that if you've got a relationship with those people, I think a lot of new managers get intimidated by the fact that, hey, I was working next to this person yesterday, and now I'm in this office now, and I got the big boy seat now. I'm in the manager seat. Ego can ruin a lot of things, but there is a real positive to that, in that you can explain the why to your crew much better than anybody else.
Sure.
You've been out there, you've done the stuff, and now you're starting to see the other side, and really the financial impact and the cultural impact it has when you make a change at the front. And if you can sit down with your crew and say, hey, listen, we've got these tires we need to get out. It's tire season. Can we get all hands on deck here? Can we get the buy-in? And they'll see a different side of you than maybe they saw in the shop, but you have the respect that you've been there, you've done that stuff, and you understand how hard their job is, and what you're asking of them is difficult. But if you can have that conversation and feel confident in that conversation that, hey, listen, my role's changed a little bit, my expectations of me have changed a little bit, and I want to work with you to produce some really cool stuff. And I think as a result, that impacts all of us. So if you're getting overloaded on something, let me know. I've been there. This is tough. This is not an easy job. Associate yourself with them. Really, don't forget where you came from, right? Don't forget those roots of the shop that helped you get to where you're at today, and help them grow, right? Help them get in a higher position, or help them reach their goals, understand what their goals are in the first place, right? I think a lot of times we just don't even think about that, of what other people might have for aspirations or goals, and help them get there. And I think you're going to have a lot of success once you sit in that seat.
Yep. And sometimes, and this is what I tell Mike, sometimes I just can't tell you everything. Once you get into a management level, there are things that you're bound that you cannot talk about.
Right.
And, I would love to be able to sit here and tell you everything, but I can't. But believe me, I'm watching out for you. Believe me, I know where you're coming from. I always will try to work for my people. I want to be a support for them, and I know where they're coming from. And we do a lot of activities that just suck. There's just nothing there's just no way around it. And, it drags on me, it drags on my team, it drags on the corporation. There's just things we have to do to make things right. And sometimes they suck, but then there's other times where we can do a lot of good, and not that the things that we're doing aren't good, but it's just, it's different. Right. And there's just those things. And so I would say the last thing with, in those scenarios where, especially if you've been promoted from within, is people need to understand that they just can't share everything. And sometimes relationships get strained because of that, but you just have to, again, build them in so that they feel trusted and that they're a contributor to what's going on, rather than an outsider looking in.
Well, and when you're painting that why, you're building trust as much as anything, right? And that's trust. You said something right there. Trust that I have your best interest in mind. And when they truly believe that, I think that's when you can go ask for things, and you can get people to go the extra mile, is if they trust you. If they don't trust you, if they think you're out for yourself, and you're going to step over bodies to get to where you're going, you're going to have a hard time getting people to do stuff for you. At least that's my experience anyways. You've got to build that trust. And if you're building that why, why you're doing that, you're not just installing brakes on a car, but you're helping a family stop. So that baby, that baby seat that's in the back seat, you're protecting that family. And I was totally guilty of that early on as a technician, right? Just another brake job, like just go pound it out, and like whatever. And I didn't know, when you pull a car in, you got a car seat in the back, and those brakes don't work, you're putting a family at risk. I mean, What other why is more powerful than that?
I've had lug nuts fall off. I didn't, when I was 16, luckily the lady pulled out of the stall, the tire fell off, and, I learned a lesson. I learned the lesson at that point that you have to fix it right the first time. But, we are all contributing factors to the safety, the reliability, and the quality of repair that every customer puts in our hands every day. And if your people are not happy, you got to wonder what's really going out your door. And you don't have to look very far to see what kind of liability that we have when we're taking customer safety into our hands. And so building that contribution, making sure they understand that they are a partnership within your business, and the power of why solves a lot of issues.
Yeah. And, we could do an entire podcast on just the whys. I feel like, something like safety, something like profitability, something like, the why of a technician goes so deep that, and maybe that's why we don't focus on it very often, is it's almost assumed, like it's the why is almost assumed so much that we don't talk about it. And I think it's so important to get that across. And a lot of times it's that touchy feely stuff, but it's so important.
Ask a technician who has left a business, a highly productive technician who's left a business to try to start a business on their own, the importance of why. And they will very quickly be able to tell you that they probably didn't have the why of what was going on at the business that they were at previously. Some of them do very well. Believe me, there's great people that are able to do that, and some of them wish they would have known more about what really goes on into the business. And that labor hour that we charge people goes to take care of a whole litany of things, including making sure that there's another customer to come in later and that the business doesn't dissolve.
The best presentation I've seen from a manager, I was actually, this is quite a long time ago. I was actually down in South Carolina at a dealership, and they were having issues with somebody in the shop stealing. So they were stealing tools, stealing parts, stealing a lot of stuff, right? And so this guy was very upset, the general manager of the store, and rather than just burst out in the shop and start screaming, he was very strategic about it. And what he did was he had a whiteboard, and he walked in and he wrote this big dollar amount on the whiteboard. And then he let the technicians, he called a meeting. It was after hours. I was there. It was probably 5:30. He let the techs come in, and it was kind of awkward, right? Like they didn't know why they were coming in, and they sat down all in this conference room, and they're looking at this whiteboard and this number, and they're kind of maybe joking around a little bit. And like, I don't know what that is, but it was very clear, right? Very bold. And so he gave them about 10 or 15 minutes and then walked in and said, "Does anybody know what this number is?" And all of the technicians kind of looked at each other and they threw some guesses out there, nothing great. He said, "That is the amount of money we have to make every month to break even."
Mm-hmm.
And it was so powerful just to share that number, because I think technicians, it's really easy, especially if you're not being communicated to assume that, I know what I get paid and I know what they're making per hour. And, I don't know what's going in between there. Why am I not making more money?
Right.
And so to sit down and actually explain everything that goes into a business, I think he ended up bringing out like his electric bill, and he brought out some other things to show them that they were real tangible expenses that came out every month.
Yep.
And in order for this to be a profitable venture to where I can give you opportunity and I can raise your pay and I can give you more benefits, anything that we want to add has to go over and above this. Otherwise we can't do anything. We're just paying our bills at that point. And their eyes were so big, and it was just,
well,
so
and a service manager's pay plan is usually after that.
Yeah.
Right. And so all the technicians get paid, they make their dollar, and because it's built into what it is, but the service manager doesn't make anything until that break-even point generally is hit. And so, again, going back to the building a partnership and getting them to understand what that contribution looks like, there's a reason why the big shoes of the service manager and the big shoes of the technician need to come together and understand what the what the business acumen is in your given area. And it will make people happier, and you can retain people. You might even be able to, recruit more people that way too, because people are happy. And you walk into the shop and you bring people in, or their word of mouth starts to flow. And so some of these things that I know you work on every day, and some of the things that we work on, which is retaining those technicians, go a long ways to building that culture. And this is just a very small component to that.
Well, this has been excellent. We're about up on our hour, and I feel like we only touched the surface here. I mean, there's so much that goes into this, and I really think that the reason why this goes into so much depth is because it's so important. And I hope the people listening today took a lot from Brian. Brian he practices what he preaches, right? He's very active with his dealers, and I love everything you do out there. I'm a big fan of everything you do out there, and I think there's definitely lessons to be learned from this podcast, and I won't let you get out of doing another one. I'll make sure that we get you back on here at some time in the near future.
Well, I really do appreciate you, Jay. Our WrenchWay partnership has been a great endeavor for us, and keep doing what you guys do, because it really is doing something in the industry to help technicians elevate themselves.
We appreciate everything Toyota does for us. We love the partnership, and you guys are all phenomenal people. So thank you for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
We'll definitely have you on again soon.
All right. Thanks a lot.